Hi, my name is Heather Whitl, and I bring you greetings from Columbia, South Carolina. When I first saw this assignment, it rather intimidated me. However, it also allowed me to reflect back on the various lessons which have helped me to reflect back on my own ways in which I communicate. One of the issues that I feel has made a difference in my communication was that of facing the fierce conversation. Stewart noted that in dealing with the fierce conversation does not have to be a bad thing. When I think of something fierce, I think of things that are aggressive or intense, and because of my personality, I try to avoid that. But I've learned that when you have a fierce conversation, it can enhance the relationship. Ignoring a situation can be just as harmful, or more so than confronting the situation. At the beginning of the course, if anyone asked me about a fierce conversation, I would immediately saw it as a negative thing, just if someone would have said the word conflict to me. Stewart enlightened me to see that conflict does not have to be a negative. However, it depends on the approach that you take. Take a look at this first slide. Communication is something I thought I did well before this course. I was under the assumption that communication was informing another your thoughts and ideas, but in order to have effective communication, it has to be giving and receiving of both parties. As it is noted on the slide, communication derives from the Latin communicare, which means to share. When we are communicating, we are purposely exchanging information and meaning. Communicating is not just verbal, but non-verbal, with such things as body language and behavior. Most times we learn to communicate based on our past experiences and our environment, and we begin to communicate from the time when we are born. When a baby cries, they are trying to communicate a need. I was told by my mother before my eldest child was born that I would learn how to interpret those cries. I couldn't tell the difference. But when he was born, we had a bond. I learned the difference. We were able to communicate even though we weren't using words. As you see on this next slide, there are some factors that contribute to communication. One is the behavior blend. Behavior blending is a combination of trait factors any one individual possesses, a specific personality pattern expressed in the way one acts or feels. Carbonell further explains human behavior with the use of the DISC model, D being active or task-oriented, I being active, people-oriented, S being passive, people-oriented, and C being passive, task-oriented. I see myself as an I-C personality, noting that I try to inspire others as well as show an interest in them. With the C, I try to be cautious in my conversation. However, sometimes I wonder if I'm too cautious, to the point that I may even lack honesty. I never wanted to be the type of person that hurts others. So many times in my life I was hurt by words, until I never wanted others to feel that same way. That I consider what Stewart stated in regards to deception. Do I deceive others when I'm not completely forthcoming? Should I learn to honestly express my thoughts without hurting the other? Deception was noted by Wilmot that is always damaging to the other person. It may appear that by deceiving another you're helping the relationship. However, in the long run, it only hurts. The other party has been given a false sense of security, and the relationship has been short-circuited, leaving the partner out. Stewart noticed to embrace the key phrase, I hear you, and I have a different perspective. This will help learn to honor the values of both parties, as well as the needs or positions simultaneously. Another contributor to communication is identity. Identity or self is a constellation of features or labels that establishes social expectations that we have for ourselves or for others. Our identity is our beliefs, and it surrounds our outcomes of conversations, and it is also something that we do rather than what we are. Our identity is a result of a mesh of events, experiences, and lessons learned over a lifetime. I also believe that identities evolve. The experiences I had when I was 14 are not the experiences I have at 44. Furthermore, because of the experience I've had has caused me to react and respond in a certain manner. At 14, I may have become very upset if a friend didn't speak to me. Now at 44, because of what I've seen and learned over the years, probably would not bother me as much now. And confidence within myself allows me to be self-assured and hopefully could add to someone else's experience. Now, the question remains, how do we effectively communicate? Take a look at this slide. We begin to communicate effectively by successfully listening to the other party and doing more exchanging words, but also exchanging how the speaker feels about what they are communicating. Effective communication provides understanding, improves relationships, awareness of nonverbal cues, as well as recognize the emotions of the listener as well as the speaker. According to Carvenho and Sobral, communication, both verbal and nonverbal, is fundamental in reaching negotiation results and resolving conflicts. When we place effort in listening and communicating, we can learn from both parties, exchange our viewpoints, as well as allow our relationship to grow deeper. Peterson noted that when we allow the speaker to speak without having to be defensive, allows him to think things through, and will later allow the speaker to be an active listener. What is needed to be an effective communicator? Look at this slide with me, please. I wonder if people ever pay attention to the way they sound when they are communicating with others. Do we ever even sound concerned to the other party? I've also been in the company of another person, and you could just tell they weren't interested in what was being said, and I'm sure this made them feel devalued or unimportant. We want the listener to feel understood, heard, as well as feel safe. It will also relieve negative emotions. When you give nonverbal cues, as noted on this next slide, try to use cues that match the words spoken. Adjust your signals and use body language to convey positive feelings. When this is done, the speaker will feel more secure and self-disclosing and will begin to relax and reduce stress. This in turn should lead to awareness. Communication is also essential in the workplace, noting that it is one of the essential elements of negotiation. It allows for a relationship of trust, clarity, and then understanding the real interests and motivations of the other parties. Because we have different backgrounds, we probably interpret cues and gestures differently. Look at this slide. Stewart noted that we are conditioned to respond to various situations as we see others in our culture react. However, in order to eliminate some of these negative nonverbal cues, Stewart noted that we ought to admit to the prejudices, commit to reducing them, identify stereotypes and modify them, and identify the action of the prejudices and modify them, and to seek feedback from others. Practice reading people and become aware of the differences in people and look for nonverbal cues in a group. As stated previously on the other slides, We should always be aware of nonverbal cues, as well as facial expressions, body movements, and gestures. Look at this slide with me. Eye contact, breathing, and muscle tension should also be considered. Body language, as most indicate, in this manner in which we communicate through nonverbal cues. According to Rugstagen, this can include how we greet others, how we sit or stand, facial expression, clothing, hairstyle, tone of voice, eye movement, the manner in which we listen, breathe, how close we stand to one another, and how we touch each other. The pressure of body language can be felt in emotional situations, especially when it speaks louder than words. These nonverbal cues can be misinterpreted, thus leading to misunderstanding. These cues can also tell the speaker more about the listener and how the listener feels about the subject more than the words. I have this same issue with my husband. He is a great guy. However, he does have a tendency not to listen to me when I'm speaking to him. It may not be anything important. I may just be talking about my day. Many times he'll be in the middle of reading a book or something, and I have to often ask him if he's even listening to me. He will respond yes, and will even repeat to me what I've said. But my question is this: if I really felt that he was listening, would I feel a need to ask him if he was listening? His body language tells me that he's not. Furthermore, there's a lack of eye contact. Even though he says that he loves me, little things like this makes me feel devalued. Now let's talk about being a more effective communicator. Take a look at this slide. In order to be an effective communicator, the listener should learn to focus on the speaker, avoid interruptions, and being judgmental, as well as showing interest to the speaker. Peterson noted that it may be tempting to interrupt the speaker and to give advice. However, when we interrupt, we become the speaker instead of the listener. When we listen, it allows the speaker to grow and accept themselves as well. As stated earlier, we communicate both verbally and non-verbally. Take a look at this slide, please. However, when we are involved in a dialogue, root word dia meaning through and log means speech, it isn't just with two people, but an exchange is taking place. One party receives or inhales, and the other gives or exhales. The party that receives based on perception, and the other that exhales does it based on openness or self-disclosure. Also, how they perceive the information is based on their own experiences. Exhaling can leave a person vulnerable, and self-disclosure should only be given if the other party is also willing to disclose. Stewart noted that when we self-disclose, it allows the relationship to go deeper. Every time I come to this thought of Stewart, it reminds me of a post of a fellow classmate. She indicated that over the years she learned not to be as trusting of others because of past hurts. Here, I see this as a twofold issue. One, disclosing to the wrong person, and that of the conflict spiral. When we disclose, we need to be mindful of who we disclose and what is disclosed. Furthermore, we need to keep in mind that if it's not reciprocated, stop disclosing. The degenerative conflict spiral can be stopped as well by reversing it. Now, We know in some point in time of our life we face stressors. Look at this slide. They can be caused by financial worries, jobs or careers, families or relationships. And with these stressors, we may speak without thinking or considering what was said or how it sounded. I try to teach my children to think before they speak. One may say to that advice that we all think before we speak. However, what I am wanting them to do is to think about the content before they let it cross their lips. However, it will be times when we ourselves will speak prematurely. But we have to remember to recognize the stress, take a moment to calm down, look for humor, be willing to compromise and agree to disagree. Peterson noted that when a person has suffered from a flat brain, for example, to remember not to hold what the other says against them or to yourself as well. What happens when we face conflict? When someone is offended, naturally we want to defend ourselves. Look at this slide. And with this defense mechanism, we may not speak or react in a positive manner. Peterson noted when our emotions are negatively affected, we can suffer what he calls flat brain syndrome. When we are hurt emotionally, we have a stomach overload, which will expand the stomach beyond normal size. Once the stomach enlarges, it pushes up, causing our heart to turn to brick. This is when we stop being open with others, and we can't give or receive suggestions. Then our brain goes flat, which causes defects in our head function, and our thinking is skewed. The skewed brain then affects hearing and vision, and finally our mouth works overtime, spilling out things that would normally not be said if we did not have a flat brain. Things are said back and forth as parties now have flat brains. This leads to the tango. Tango, anyone? Look at this slide with me, please. How do we stop the dance? You stop the dance by stopping the music. Peterson noted 4 goals to counter the flat brain syndrome. 1. Reduce emotional disturbance. 2. Clarify your thinking. 3. Increase confidence. And 4. Build supportive friendships. Using this approach would have been most helpful in the situation of Caleb and Catherine. In the movie Fireproof, it was obvious that they were most concerned with winning the battle instead of the war. Their relationship was like a tug of war, noting that one would dish out insults and the other would give back, and no one was hearing the other. Not until Caleb wanted to change the music did real change take place. He had to clarify his thinking, reduce emotional disturbances, increase self-confidence by listening with respect before he and Catherine could rebuild their relationship. Also, one should not judge the other party, but allow for the speaker to complete thoughts. Look at this next slide. It also suggests that we should not be an accuser, but to learn to rephrase statements, thus allowing the listener to hear and understand frustrations without feeling that they are the cause of them. In order to be an effective listener, look at this slide. Burley and Allen noted there are 3 levels of listening: empathetic listening, hearing words but not really listening, and listening in spurts. We also have to be aware of listening through filters. This can damage the listening process if one is not careful, because, for example, if we listen to others based on our past experiences, our experience may not be another's experience. Therefore, we become biased and disregard certain parts that one may not be able to relate to. Stewart noted that when we take a step back and consider another's experience, we may be able to leave the conversation with a new outlook. Patience will be needed as well as trust, especially when parties have been hurt. That thought brings me again to the situation of a fellow classmate who had issues with disclosing secondary to the past hurts. In order to help someone to overcome, we as listeners need to be patient to establish trust, as well as allowing the speaker to speak, because you don't want the listener to become the speaker. Also, remember to consider the meta message. Look at this slide. When we are communicating, one should be mindful that the listener may read into what the speaker is trying to say. This seems to me be most common in close family relationships. I, too, have been guilty of reading a meta message with my husband. He may tell me that he's not ready to eat, and I interpret it as he doesn't like what I've cooked. One way to deal with the meta message is to create a meta communication. Talk about your ways of talking. Learn to preface comments. In this manner, both parties and their perspectives will be taken into consideration. Now, let's just sum it up. Look at this last slide with me, please. The Bible noted in Isaiah, the 1st chapter, the 18th verse, that we ought to come together and reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. Within this verse of Scripture, according to Gill's exposition of the entire Bible, noted that God, despite being pleased with the nation of Judah, wanted to come together at the bar of mercy. He wanted to communicate with them and have a relationship. When we pray, we commune with God, and that tells me that communication and relationships are important to God. Therefore, relationships ought not to be taken lightly. They make an impact on the lives of others, and we as Christians need to place special importance on relationships and communication. Therefore, communication constantly needs to be considered and cultivated. As we communicate, we need to be mindful that we all communicate based on our experiences. Nevertheless, we ought not to avoid the fierce conversation and disclosure, as it can add to the relationship. Communication is the relationship. Therefore, we need to shift our ideas from winning to understanding. Finally, we need to learn to not to be an accuser. Thank you for this opportunity to express how this course of interpersonal communication has enhanced my communication skills. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation as much as I have enjoyed giving it. May God continue to bless you. Thank you.